What if every time you went on social media, your timeline was flooded with heartbreaking news about more casualties in the very city you were born and raised in? My survivor's guilt was too vast for me to do anything about it. My name is Nasser Almanj, and I am the founder and CEO of the Youth of the World Together organization YWT, and this is my ride from a frustrated teenager to a leading youth democracy activist. YWT is a non-profit youth organization that creates online and offline safe platforms for free expression that promote democratic values and human rights.
I left Yemen in 2012 and moved to the United States. I might have moved there physically, but I remained in Yemen both mentally and virtually. And in 2015, the ongoing war began, and with it came the curbing of the already limited freedoms. The polarization was widespread. Different parties to the conflict soon began recruiting youth and installing in them ideologies that serve their agendas. The youth started to believe that the situation will never be changed through democracy and peaceful means, and the only solution for them is to get armed and go to the military fronts. So I took it upon myself to use the privilege of being an American and share some, no matter how little, of the freedom I enjoyed as a Yemeni American living in the United States. The immense drive I felt, along with the passion I have for filmmaking, and my firm belief in the power of arts, media, and culture as the most effective way to engage and activate youth for supporting democratic process and initiatives. Our very first project as the YWT was a conference we called Volunteer Talks, V-Talks. The goal of V-Talks was to create a platform for Yemeni volunteers to share their experiences and to promote and enhance the culture of volunteerism amongst Yemeni youth. We hosted the event 1 year after the war began to encourage the youth to live in the now, to volunteer now, and never give up or wait until the conflict is over to get started. This later became a guiding start for us at YWT. We will not start when the conflict ends, we will start to make the conflict end. We will contribute to bringing that end by creating a resilient generation capable of leading Yemen toward a brighter future. Despite V-Talks being our very first project, we had a great turnout with our incredible team of volunteers. The success of that event and the impact we saw that it had on those who attended fueled our fire and made us realize how important the existence of an organization such as YWT was, and inspired us to strive to get to where we are today. Today, YWT oversees 29 projects reaching 11.4 thousand beneficiaries. We have contributed to shaping their way of thinking about human rights by engaging them in spreading the culture of democracy. We have launched several advocacy campaigns, the last of which reached over 3.8 million people in just 7 days.
One of YWT's most cherished projects is Triq24. It is an independent youth social media platform that promotes openness, accountability, and democratic ideals via the use of data visualization, fact-checking, and narrative, as well as by shedding light on important events by designing content that reflects Yemeni society today. In a country where most people get their news from social media, Triq24 is the only youth platform that has no affiliation with any political party. It uses the spoken Arabic vernacular to ensure the receptivity of audience. Over the last 2 years, Triq24 has acquired more than 50,000 followers on all its social media accounts, reaching 500,000 users, 10,000 page visits, and 11,000 account engagements per month. At Triq24, we specialize in effectively discussing taboo topics of extreme sensitivity to our conservative society in a manner that is not only engaging but also liberating, and we can quantify that based on the very human responses we receive from our audience. Here's a quote from one of our female audience members who said, and I quote, "You helped me break out of my fears and barriers of shame." We are proud of the trust we have been able to build with them and how they open their hearts to us. In addition to that, we also educate people about their rights by simplifying the Yemeni constitution and laws, which gives us a considerable amount of feedback on human rights. Our fact-checking work also garners us a great deal of engagement. Despite it being a new kind of content in Yemen, our audience even begins sending us topics they find questionable to fact-check so that they too can contribute on ending the spread of misinformation just like we asked them.
We have trained 127 filmmakers and 44 content creators who promoted democratic values and human rights in their work, in addition to producing 67 films, and started Yemeni first ever dedicated human rights film festival, Karama Yemen, which aims to advocate for human rights and social justice, encouraging debate and open a democratic dialogue on human rights issues by screening films from different parts of the world. Expanding the horizon of those whom the dictators and armed militia having done everything to convince them that democracy is a dangerous ideology foreign to our culture, when in reality it was our ancient Yemeni Queen of Sheba who introduced the concept of Shura, consultative democracy. And our civilization has long prided itself on coexistence and protection of dignity and human rights. Our platform works to install democracy as part of everyone's daily routine applicable to every aspect of life, whether at home, in the street, or in the country as a whole. Our platform actively counters the widespread hate speech and disinformation being shared on social media platforms and beyond. We have proved that art and culture are not only luxury and means for entertainment, but are in fact effective tools for creating social change. The idea of remotely managing a team you have never met was intimidating. In addition to the 14-hour difference, Yemen having some of the worst internet in the world didn't make anything easier. Not to mention the security risk of operating in a disputed capital under the threat of airstrike on one hand and imprisonment on the other, especially given the sensitivity of our work. Another challenge was that, because of the country situation, the majority of funding to CSOs in Yemen was redirected to the humanitarian work. The cliché saying, "nothing worth having comes easy," perfectly describe our work at YWT. Finally, we must remember that wars don't last forever. The coming of peace is certain, and that this too shall pass. And once that time comes, youth will bear the burden of transforming the fate of the nation. And we will do everything in YWT's power to ensure that the youth of the world together are prepared to shoulder that burden.
Kalbunur Siddiq is from the Urumqi region of East Turkestan. She was a Mandarin teacher in an elementary school. In 2017, she was sent by the authorities to educate people she was told were illiterate. Kalbunur was forced to teach Mandarin at a men's camp between March and September 2017, as well as at a women's camp between September and October of the same year. Kalbunur, who now lives in exile in the Netherlands, estimates that the two camps held around 3,000 and 10,000 detainees, respectively. In our interview with Kalbunur, she provided rare insights into the management of China's camp system. But despite her freedom, Kalbunur is still haunted by the abuses she regularly witnessed in the camps. My name is Muater Ilikut. I am a project analyst at Uyghur Transitional Justice Database. Uyghur Transitional Justice Database is an ongoing project that focuses on the registration of the disappeared and extrajudicially interned Uyghurs in East Turkestan. We're the largest database documenting the atrocities being committed by the Chinese Communist Party towards the Uyghurs and other Turkic populations since the revision of its legislation in 2017. that legislation allowed the local governments to educate and transform people influenced by extremism at so-called vocational training centers, which are actually concentration camps given their extrajudicial nature. The UTGD gathers data about this persecution and produces report based on our data. Most of our data are gathered through online information platforms, as well as testimonies given by family members, friends, and colleagues of those who are detained. For each testifier, we create over 60 data points, making our research particularly deep. The UTGD team is traveling to the Netherlands to meet Kalbanoor and take face-to-face interviews. We will document her stories and expose the mass atrocities committed by the Chinese regime.
Ziyaretimizni qabul qilganingizga rahmat. Başta 2017 yıldan başlap lagerda ko'rganlaringizni tafsiliy so'zlab bersangiz bo'ladimi?
Men 2017 yılı 3. aydan başlap Xitoy hukumatining majburlashi bilan kampi lagerlarga o'qituvchilikqa evatildim. Men borgan bu lagerlar intayin dahshatlik, intayin qo'rqinchli bir o'rin bo'lib, bu yerda harbiy soqchilar qurolli xuddi jangga chiqadigan holatda turdi. Men borgan dastlab kundalam 18-20 yoshlik atrofidagi bir qizning jasadining ikki harbiy achkit borganligini ko'zim bilan ko'rdim. U lagerlardagi mahbuslar qarorli
Willow blue.
Oh, that's bright. Yeah.
Welcome all to the closing session of the 11th Global Assembly of the World Movement for Democracy. My name is Josh Rogan. I'm a columnist with the Washington Post. I know what you're all thinking. Closing session, we just got here. It went by too fast. After so much waiting and not being together, we get to Taipei. The weather's so nice. The people are so warm. The food is so good. But you don't have to leave the country. You just have to leave this ballroom after this session. But what I would just say to you is that, my experience here, and I'd like to thank the World Movement for Democracy, our gracious hosts, National Endowment for Democracy. It's been really special for a lot of us, seeing old friends, meeting new friends, and I'm sure that this will just be the beginning of what will be new networks, new relationships, and a lot of new initiatives. And so what happens out in Taipei does not stay in Taipei. So keep those cards, follow up, and hopefully we'll see each other again at the 12th Assembly soon. Meanwhile, we still have one excellent panel left. The topic is Claiming the Democratic Future, Securing Technology for Democracy, which, when I saw that headline, I thought to myself, oh, wow, that means that it's not secure. We had come up in this era where we thought that the free flow of technology and communication was 100% good, that it would necessarily lead to reform and liberalization and would advance all of the core initiatives and values that free and open societies believe in, but something happened. The history didn't end, and the jungle grew back. And I think a lot of what we've heard this week has been about how actually, as Ann Applebaum told us, Autocracy Inc. is on the march. And actually, as Maria Ressa told us, we're in the last 2 minutes of a very important and crucial game. So how do we deal with that? How do we make sure that the flow of technology and communication doesn't result in the backslide of freedom and democracy around the world? I couldn't have a better panel than this one to discuss this, and let me quickly introduce my panelists. Sitting next to me is May Al-Sadani, Managing Director of the Legal and the Legal and Judicial Director. Two titles, sorry. She's got two jobs at the Tahrir Institute for Middle East Policy. Then we have Xiao Zhang, the research scientist at the School of Information at the University of California at Berkeley, and Eileen Donahoe, Executive Director of the Global Digital Policy Incubator at Stanford University. You'll notice that our original panelist, Audrey Tong, the digital minister, was called away, not sitting here, she was called away to testify before the legislature. But we do have a special video message from her that she's prepared specifically for this event, and I direct you to your screen to watch it now.
Good afternoon. I'm Audrey Tang, Taiwan's digital minister. It is a genuine honor and privilege to be invited to the World Movement for Democracy's 11th Global Assembly in Taipei. As you are all undoubtedly aware, I was set to participate physically in the Assembly's first in-person edition since 2018 in Senegal, but my presence Thursday is required in the legislature to handle the budgetary matters for the Ministry of Digital Affairs. Scheduling clashes are regrettable, but this is the reality we must all come to terms with when serving the people and striving to satisfy the highest standards of good governance. Fortunately, we've arranged a Wednesday meeting with many of you, and rest assured, I will endeavor to make amends at the 12th edition of the Assembly if blessed with an invitation. Before sharing ideas with you on how Taiwan can help promote digital democracy, foster open innovation, and galvanize a global commitment to free the future, I wish first to thank Damon Wilson, President and CEO of the National Endowment for Democracy, to Ryota Jonan, Director of the World Movement for Democracy, to all the supporting staff, to our moderator, Josh Rogan, and fellow speakers, Eileen Donahoe and Mai El-Sadani. Your efforts, your passion, and your support of democracy and Taiwan are exemplary. Now, the world as we know it is at a crossroads. The COVID-19 and Russia's brutal war of aggression against Ukraine have altered the geopolitical landscape in such a way that authoritarian expansionism is emboldened to lay siege to our once seemingly impregnable fortresses of democracy. Indeed, a long shadow is again falling over the cherished shared values, providing security and prosperity for billions of people around the globe. As a force for good, sharing our resources and know-how with international partners from the four corners of the globe, Taiwan understands the critical importance of defending democracy. And the central plank in this approach involves fostering independent, civil society-led digital innovation through human-centered technology. It is imperative that we strengthen our pillars of participatory policymaking by connecting with all segments of society using digital era communications as well as safe and familiar platforms. Taiwan's successes in this regard span an array of areas. Several I wish to elaborate upon link to public digital infrastructures, to the impact of G0V or Gov0, to people-public-private partnerships, and to co-creation. You see, reliable infrastructure makes our lives safer and more convenient. And the public infrastructure in the digital realm does the same for democracy. Here in 2015, Civic Technologies invented Airbox. It's a low-cost air quality tracker. Now it is in a variety of places from schools to household balconies. Citizen science supplemented the public sector's limited capacity. It exemplified data stewardship and environmental education. In 2016, our government initiated the Civil IoT Taiwan program, the first time we classified those infrastructure budget in the digital realm as infrastructure. Originally, there were 2,000 Airbox devices countrywide, and now there are tens of thousands. The next step after data sharing is forming shared goals through assistive intelligence. Uber's entry was largely welcomed to Taiwan in 2015, but it did trigger taxi driver discontent. Again, with the assistance of the GovZero or G0V community, the government utilized the police system to help stakeholders discover areas of agreement. For example, safety, that's a shared value on which all parties concur. And the rough consensus, or good enough consensus, is that drivers need to have professional licenses, purchase insurance, and pay taxes, and these are all ratified in the diversified taxi program for the following year. And police also features in discussions among countries during, for example, the AIT, American Institute in Taiwan's digital dialogues in 2019, and the COHAC, Collaborative Coronavirus Hackathon in 2020. With a visualized spectrum of opinion, participants can plainly see where they stand, compare with others, and co-create this good enough consensus. By harnessing the limitless power of civil society's collective intelligence, we can build a workable foundation for how the government should approach very controversial topics. The secret is to learn with the people, to participate, to grow trust in all parts of the process by learning how to engage openly and positively, while celebrating commonality and good enough consensus, as opposed to getting lost in the thickets of conflict. Here, the participation officers embedded in each and every ministry are an instrumental part of the process. The participation officers are tasked with coordinating interagency collaboration and coordinating people-public-private dialogues. For example, after any proposal is initiated on Join.gov.tw, a public policy participation platform established by the cabinet-level National Development Council, the officers will initiate the conversations across sectors to invite stakeholders joining on the e-petition to the face-to-face collaborative meetings for discussions on ways to incorporate those ideas into decision-making. And this empowers our younger generation, gives them an equal opportunity to craft policies despite being too young to vote in elections. So this intergenerational solidarity is a vital ingredient in our recipe for spurring effective, healthy, and inclusive online democracy and democratic deliberation. In addition to suggesting policies, the public, the private, and the social sectors can directly co-create through the exciting Presidential Hackathon initiative. Since its launch in 2018, this annual event has paved the way for collaborating on the digital public infrastructures. Thousands of individuals, social entrepreneurs, civil servants, teams from dozens of countries, we have gathered together, worked together with 5 outstanding teams every year selected and awarded by the President, Dr. Tsai Ing-wen, upon conclusion of each annual edition. And the people-public-private partnerships, of course, become our flagship achievement after those co-creation, coordination. Many PPPP standouts emerged during the darkest days of coronavirus, including the mask map and the 1922 SMS contact tracing initiatives. Even though now the world is transitioning to the post-pandemic new life, they boast enormous potential for expanded borderless applications. I envision the PPPP model as one of the modest key platforms for international cooperation and tie-ups between Taiwan and all democracies, especially in the Indo-Pacific, as we set about answering the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres' call at the UNGA for the all-hands-on-deck approach to solving global challenges. Indeed, as a signatory to the Declaration for the Future of the Internet this April, along with 60 partners around the globe, Taiwan is committed to strengthen democracy, freedom, and human rights through PPPP. This commitment to building partnerships and deepening engagement is paying handsome dividends for the country and its 23.5 million people. By reinvigorating and revitalizing our democracy from the ground up, we are strengthening resilience in the face of external threats and showing those living under the yoke of authoritarianism that restrictions of civic freedom is not par for the cause. We are also showing that Taiwan's model of digital democracy is achievable, is sustainable, and most importantly, worthy of emulation. And in this undertaking, strengthening digital resilience plays a key role. The mode at our ministry was launched in August with plurality, the overarching vision. During our preparatory work, we concentrated on developing the core value of digital resilience for all. And this refers to the ability to respond and recover quickly from any adverse impact, learning from the experience of being attacked, and then strengthening ourselves. Case in point is our focus on preventing a repeat of a distributed denial of service attacks, cyber attacks, during U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's historic visit in August. At the time, we were subjected to the flood of foreign cyber attacks, with digital signage in malls outside train stations and convenience stores hacked with hateful messages. The experience proved educational and instructional, paving the way for a raft of cybersecurity system upgrades to be implemented. But fortunately, Taiwan possesses advanced IT industries and deep experience in disarming those cyber attacks. Building a trustworthy and stable supply chain based on our strong chip industry is now a top policy priority for all of us. And these assets dovetail with the democratic camp's efforts to overcome cybersecurity-related obstacles. Made in Taiwan, or MIT, is now more than a guarantee of quality. It is a guarantee of trust. This double T definition is our country's international calling card of dependability. The MODA understands that preparation is half the battle won, and those who would attempt to hollow out our democracy should keep one thought in mind, that Taiwan is an island of resilience. Now, this brings me to the deeper question of how best to capitalize on our strengths and resilience while mobilizing collectively. As the COVID-19 and Russia's brutal war of aggression against Ukraine have demonstrated, the free world is only as strong as our weakest link. So it is time for a global movement to ensure we leave no one behind, as per the theme of the Assembly in claiming the democratic future and unifying voices for a new frontier. Here I would like to propose Free the Future as our call to action. Free the Future is a personally designed catchphrase encapsulating the MODA's core philosophy that nothing is set in stone, and all possibilities can be realized with commitment, courage, self-belief, and vision. I also see Free the Future as a rallying cry for Taiwan and all responsible members of the international community to invest, like Taiwan does, in civic technologies to strengthen democracy. To give no trust is to get no trust. As democracies, we must trust our citizens. The truth of the matter is we are at a watershed moment in history. The onus is on each and every one of us to recognize the magnitude of this challenge and then act. As the tide of time and recent events have shown, democracy in all its shapes and forms still is the best way of safeguarding freedom for generations to come. Friends, thank you for listening and allowing me to contribute to today's conversation. Sincerely, I wish you live long and prosper.
I'd like to thank Minister Tong for her participation and her leadership on this issue. Okay, since this is the last session, we're going to leave some time at the end for questions and comments in the form of questions, so get those ready. But first, I'd like to begin with our panelists. What we're going to try to do in the meantime is, first of all, define the problem, and then see if we can come up with some actionable ideas of how to craft solutions. Let me start with you. This is going to be a question to all the panelists, but let me start with you, Eileen. When we talk about the threat of digital authoritarianism, what are we talking about? Let's make it very clear. Who are the most problematic actors? What are they doing in tech that they didn't used to do before? And what are the different vectors of this problem from your perspective?
So given that this is our closing panel, and we have a fairly dark subject to cover, I felt like I would just want to start by saying thank you to Ned for bringing us all together in this incredibly special place at this strange juncture in time. I know for myself, I really needed a dose of optimism coming from the United States, and I certainly got it. And you know, the highlights for me, one of them, strangely enough, was Anne Applebaum's opening keynote on Autocracy, Inc., which obviously is not an uplifting topic, but her brilliance and clarity, you know, makes you feel like we cannot lose. And then the leaders panel it was Rosa Maria from Cuba, Leopoldo from Venezuela, I think Zigis, if that's how you say it, from Lithuania, Glanis from Zimbabwe, all of them together with Larry Diamond, just demonstrated so much courage and confidence in freedom. It was really striking. And then last but not least is Minister Audrey Tang, I find to be such a unique voice in this space, inherently uplifting, and she has a really organic feel for the beneficial potential of technology and helping us move back to that positive vision. So I just had to start there.
Sure.
To Josh's question, what is digital authoritarianism? You know, what's new in this space? I think it's important to recognize digital authoritarianism as a phenomenon that is about much more than repressive application of technology, which is part of it. I think we have to see it as an alternative model of governance that is spreading around the world, competing with democracy. And it's an entire techno-social system that is antithetical to democracy in that, and even antithetical to the original optimistic, if naive, vision of what digital technology could mean for democracy, in that it's essentially about providing control to the state, control over the information realm and control over citizens. What I see as new and peculiarly dark in this space is AI-enabled tools have turbocharged all pre-existing forms of repression. In particular, well, obviously, mass surveillance, panopticon surveillance, targeted surveillance, but an unbelievable level of control over the information realm previously unimaginable, and new social engineering tools to shape motivations, behavior of citizens. So, and it's spreading around the world through diffusion of technology, export of repressive apps, export of entire information infrastructure systems embedded with repressive capacities that are, the use of which is being normalized. And so it's just a very dark place. And also, it's diffusion of ideas about the digital realm, norms and narrative being spread in multilateral fora and international standards bodies, trying to set the international order for the future. And so all combined, should be taken by democracies as an existential threat to democracy as a form of governance, and because this model is on track to become the dominant model in the 21st century digital context.
That's cheerful. Shao, same question. Do you agree with that framing of the problem, and what do you see from your perspective?
Okay. First off, I'm sitting in Minister Tang's seat. It's a very big seat. But we're on the same team, as you notice on our T-shirts. This is the Ukraine national soccer jersey, if you don't recognize. She talked about the beneficial, hopeful side of technology using to strengthening the democracy. Many inspirational applications, explorations happening in this place. It's really admirable. Now, come back to Josh's question and follow with my colleague Eileen. We're talking about digital authoritarianism. To me, digital authoritarianism means the use of the information technology by authoritarian regimes to surveil, to manipulate, to repress domestic or foreign populations. Unfortunately, digital authoritarianism is at a rise globally. At the center of it, the powerhouse of it, is People's Republic of China. It's not some remote dystopian. The surveillance, the control, the coercion under the technology is a fact of life for Chinese citizens today. Yes, it comes with innovation, convenience, productivity, fun, but the dark side also comes to it. But even more so, this is the challenge in front of us, which is the democracies, the open society with rule of law, are struggling, trying to find the balance between efficiency, those technologies, and the preservation of privacy, human agency, or autonomy. But for authoritarian regime, big data AI is an enabling technology. It's a technology of control for the central power. And they don't have any concern about privacy. They have a mass source of data. And they gain some kind of an upper hand at this stage. I probably will come in to say a few things later on this. But let's just say big data and AI is a centralized technology. It's a highly efficient form of control. It does generate knowledge, but enabling the ruling power. And in China, in the hands of Chinese Communist Party, it is a perfect instrument. And this is what we're facing. But finally, I want to say, those technologies developed in China, it's going global. Not only Huawei 5G we're talking about. We're talking about Beidou system. It's already being used more than 150 countries, surpass GPS. We're talking about TikTok, which is a global phenomenon. We're talking about Tencent's WeChat, which is embedded in every life of overseas Chinese diaspora, which is all over the world. We're talking about their payment systems. We're talking about digital Chinese currency is coming up. And Internet of Things. Those things made in China, they're affordable, they're functional, they're competitive, they go all the markets. It will be in your house, it will be in your living room, it will be in your bedroom, it will be in your kitchen. And where are those data go? These are the questions in front of us. That Chinese state will get those data, they will get the influence, while the market and other societies get convenience, get efficiency, and control. From a Chinese government policy view, they call it a win-win diplomacy. But for every person who concerned about human dignity and freedom, this is the tremendous challenge we're facing.
Thank you, thank you. May, same question, maybe from the perspective of how you see digital authoritarianism in your region.
Sure. Thank you, Josh, and thank you to the World Movement for Democracy for bringing us together. I come from a region, and I work on a region, the Middle East and North Africa, where the internet tech has been a beautiful thing. I'll start with that. It had, in 2011, facilitated the spread of a remarkable message, a message of freedom, justice, dignity, social justice. The fact that people look to the internet to learn that those around them, their neighbors, were taking to the streets to protest, to demonstrate against decades of corruption and mismanagement and abuse. And that inspired movements across the region. Egypt looked to Tunisia, Syria and Yemen looked to Egypt and Tunisia, and it continued. And it's continued in the years since, even in later protest movements in 2019 across the region. The internet has been a space where we've learned from each other and we've exchanged. And it's also been a space where there has been a remarkable use of tech apps. As early as 2010 or 2011, I think of the Egyptian application HarassMap, which allowed activists to report incidents of sexual harassment, and that created a movement to outright criminalize sexual harassment. Or I think of the coalitions that have been built in recent years from the MENA region online. Coalitions like the MENA Surveillance Coalition, which has allowed and really facilitated this movement that has stood up to Pegasus and some of these horrific forms of technology. So it's been a remarkable tool. But of course, governments have noticed. And I think this is really at the heart of what digital authoritarianism is. It's this control for narrative. They've realized the power of the internet and the power of tech, and they've wanted to control it. And we see this through the passing of laws like cybercrime laws or media laws, the application of terrorism laws against advocates and activists who post on social media. We see this through surveillance, surveillance that's facilitated by tech, but also surveillance that happens just by monitoring. In the MENA region, we have a number of public prosecutor offices who have units dedicated just to monitoring social media. And those units lead to the prosecution of cases and the prosecution of activists. We've seen governments shut down the internet. Just this week, when we were here on October 25, the one-year anniversary of the coup in Sudan, the military coup, activists took to the streets, and the government responded by shutting down the internet for what is the 7th time since 2021. But it's not just governments. Platforms have a big part of the story as well, and I think that's something I haven't heard yet.
Yeah.
These companies, these platforms, are contributing to the facilitation of digital authoritarianism in a way. Two primary ways I can think of in the MENA region. The first is the removal of evidence from the online space. We saw YouTube remove documentation of war crimes and crimes against humanity in Yemen and Syria at a critical time when that information was could have been used as evidence for cases. And yet we saw this kind of removal and this lack of recognition of what the internet meant and how useful it could be to advocates. And on the flip side, platforms' failure to understand content moderation, their failure to invest in content moderation in Arabic or to apply their policies equally or to understand the region has resulted in real world harm. I think of the example of hate speech online in Iraq and how it manifested in real world violence. We had advocates that were assassinated as a result of what was said online and a failure to properly take down those posts or respond to them. And the example of queer activists in Tunisia, LGBT activists who were doxxed online, and a failure to properly respond to that resulted in serious threats to their life. So I think for me, digital authoritarianism is complex, and the online space is complex. I still insist on believing that it can be beautiful, but I think what's happened is that we haven't caught up. And the question is whether we can catch up. And I think a really big part of that is understanding the responsibility of actors and really being in the room. And I think that's where I hope to take the conversation in a little bit, kind of what human rights advocates can do to make sure that they're in the room as these technologies are being developed rather than after the fact.
Excellent. Okay, well, we've put a lot on the table here. I've heard about international standards. I've heard about AI-enabled tools. I've heard about the role of platforms, the role of civil society, TikTok, big data. We're going to get to all of that, but let me first start at the 30,000-foot level, because I think, Eileen, what you said actually is where I want to go next, which is this idea that we're basically looking at two different governance models for the internet. And it's a systems competition. And it mirrors the greater systems competition between free and open societies on the one hand and autocracies on the other hand. So to my mind, it seems like if we're defining this, and I think it's right to do this as a systems competition, well, either one side loses or the other side loses, or a third option is that we head into a world where our two systems, our two internets are living separate and apart from each other. Is that really what we're talking about here? Are we talking about, is the goal to make sure that our internet governance system prevails and becomes the only one? Or is it the goal to just to protect our information space as much as we can? And what happens if the other outcome happens and actually the authoritarian internet governance system wins out?
So I completely agree. We have system rivalry, no question. But the issue of what do we mean by two internets or a divided internet is a sort of a sub-part of that. And so, originally the internet, that term was used to reference the technical layers, the hardware and software that facilitated instantaneous global connectivity. So we're talking about actual hard infrastructure like undersea cables, routing protocols, software protocols at the DNS level, and then later the web protocols, the hyperlink, HTTP. All of that together gave us what we then thought was the miracle of the internet and the web. As we moved toward digitization of everything and connectivity of everything, we shifted our meaning a little bit, morphed into looking at what is happening on the internet at the content layers. Not the technical layers, but what's happening on top. And we even perceived of the internet as a separate online space that's different from the physical realm. And I can remember, this was just a decade ago, in 2012, the first UN resolution on internet freedom used the language protecting human rights online as offline. And our goal was to solidify the idea that human rights are actually applicable in this separate other space. Here, in the world we live in now, that distinction has really collapsed. We have IoT, we have digitization of everything. And so I think in the present moment, sometimes when we talk about a divided internet, we're really referring to the broader sense of divided digital societies. And then in what sense and in what regard, what level are we actually divided? That gets back to the rhetorical level, almost two visions of what the internet should be. We don't yet have two internets when it comes to the technical layers, the hardware and software protocols. However, the caveat there is everybody should expect challenges in that regard. We've already seen the Chinese put forth a new IP protocol at the ITU, which really would suggest a split. And
explain the significance of that IP protocol at the International Telecom.
So, if we believe in a global, open, interoperable internet so that there is global access to information, cross physical boundaries, and the originators of those protocols really came from a free expression point of view and open access to information. The Chinese would like to have a very different set of rules that, again, would sort of embed the ability to surveil and also be a default toward their technologies, which would then prop them up and make them more powerful around the world. So I want to mention one other piece here on the two internets. In practice, even at this level of vision, where we have a competition over what kind of internet we want, in practice, we have a much more complicated situation because of this. The authoritarian notion of cyber sovereignty has been manifest around the world, even within democracies. And so instead of two internets, we kind of have the so-called splinternet, a fragmentation where every geopolitical space has its own rules, its own norms, its own values for what happens. And yet the real concern is, are we going to move toward division at the technical layer?
Got it. To follow up on that, Xiao, explain to our audience how the Chinese government's efforts to export and cement its own internet governance norms, standards, and policies and procedures fit into its overall strategy to export its more broad governance ideas and influence around the world.
Yeah, actually also follow up what Eileen was just describing. Sure. The two internet, maybe, technically we're connected, but two different digital societies, a digital world. I want to even go one step further. There are the two views, at least, to look at human nature. In democracies, the world we're living, that we value the individuality, the human agency and autonomy. Under the Chinese Communist Party, they do not see the individual, the citizenry, is really a topic. They see every individual is a subject of the state. They're the tools that belongs to the emperor, they belong to the collective entity, the nation state, and its goal. It's superior. They also has, in China, a Leninistic party. It has a structure of a group of ruling elites, control every aspect of society, and set the agenda, whether economic or social and political, of the society. And the technology, same digital technology, when you apply to that kind of society, then you generate a different society, what I call the digital totalitarianism. The technology itself has very questionable side of it. We all know in the large corporations that we become, every cell phone users or every social media platform users, we become sort of data generating point. A human being being degenerated into some kind of object being evaluated by digital algorithm. We're either being sold to the market, but in China the case, and also being controlled by the party state. So in this kind of general framework, then we look at the internet and digital technology, that we still very, very connected. Without those internet connections, there's no Chinese today's economy, or they cannot function, nor it could have the US economy or European economy or Taiwan economy, in a matter of fact, everybody. The digital aspect of life, it's so deep in us. But how those technologies are being developed and being used in different societies, particularly coming to the political impact, is so different. That's why the Chinese government, not only Chinese government, there's Russia, there's Egypt, there's many other authoritarian government too, that to go with the idea of internet sovereignty, right? They want their full control and in their territory, not only about the technology, but every aspect of the technology generated, particularly including data. So that's coming to the next question. We living in a very complicated, entangled, technical-wise world, but same time has a different set of values and building the society around it. And those societies are competing at each other. And for us, who values human freedom and dignity, how can we make the technology not only work the best for good, but also preventing the worst for evil?
Al, what's the answer? You can answer.
I'll come to the answer.
Okay, we'll come back to that.
Yeah.
Do you, Shel, before I move on, I want to ask you, I'm also old enough to remember when we used to talk about internet freedom as a human right. Do you believe that we have a responsibility in free and open societies to bring that internet freedom to people in the closed societies, especially people inside of China? Do you think it should be part of our strategy to crash the Great Firewall and bring the free and open digital system to those who don't have it?
Well, the freedom in the Chinese society of Chinese people, it's of course is in the same enterprise of global freedom. There's no way we can really separate each other. As I said, that when the entire Chinese population under that kind of totalitarian regime control, we're already witnessing the global impact of it, right? Great Firewall, in my view, actually, it is the weakest link of this totalitarian technology infrastructure. It does preventing the entire Chinese internet users, which is more than 1 billion of them, that access to the content information, particularly to the global website. But at the same time, it has so many loopholes that there are many, many technical and social sort of creative efforts that still, like right this moment, millions of people in China can circumvent that Great Firewall and access information. Then the question is, can the open societies really help to facilitate that process? I don't think we should create technologies that to put it on the servers inside of China, and that'll become the different set of international law issue. But there are open source movement, and there are many of the the activities, innovations happening outside of the Great Firewall, not in the territorial People's Republic of China. However, those activities and the tools and the techniques are being used and can be empowered to assist the more Chinese citizens that using those kind of techniques and technologies to have access to information otherwise they don't have. Would that help? Absolutely. I wouldn't call that as crashing the entire Chinese Great Firewall, because that will be a military issue, as a matter of fact. Unless US and China, or some country with China has the hard war, that wouldn't be a diplomacy policy.